Welcome everyone for this webinar that we are organizing as part of GPST and that we have teamed up today with DTU and our presenters from DTU and in junction with the MOPO project and EU projects. So my name is Jean-Nicolas Louis. I'm a team leader at VTT, the National Research Center of Technology of Finland. And the session today will be moderated by myself and Nina Heliste, who is a senior scientist also at VTT and a coordinator of the MOPO project. So to start the webinar, some housekeeping rules. So by default, everyone is automatically muted and the videos are off. During the Q&A session, we should be able to enable the video on if necessary, but you can also ask your questions in the Q&A boxes that is available in the toolbar and ask questions. As you notice, the webinar is recorded and it will be available then shortly after on the GPST YouTube channel, and we will email you then the link to where to view the webinar that is going to be presented today. And so we will have about 40 minutes-ish of presentations from Matti, and then about 15 minutes of question and answer that you would have then for Matti and have an open discussions on what is going to be presented today. So as I mentioned, this webinar is organized by GPST and MOPO. So GPST is the Global Power System Transformation Consortium, which is not like a single entity, but it's a consortium of multiple partners that are striving towards supporting system operators in the development of new tools and new data that are required in the future. And I am co-leading this one of the pillar, which is the pillar 5 on open data and open tools, where we are promoting the use and the development of open tools for system operators. And with us today, so we have two representatives of the MOPO project, which is a European project that looks at the development of open tools, comprehensive open tools and open data sets for 100% sustainable and resilient energy systems. And as part of this, we are creating different pipelines for the European data sets. Well, different data sets on the resources, whether it's wind, solar, hydro, gas network, transportation, building, and industrial, visualization tools, and optimization, open optimization model using SpineOpt, which is one of the open source tools for energy system modeling. And so today we are going to have a presentation specifically on wind and solar, and I'm happy to have Matti Koivisto with me from DTU, who is a senior scientist at DTU and one of the main developers of the CorRES tool that is going to be presented today. So welcome, Matti, and I will hand the floor to you.
Thanks a lot, Jan. It's great to be here. I hope you can all hear me well. And it's also great to see that we have Anders Banhøj Hansen from Energinet, the Danish TSO here. So that's great. Thanks a lot, Anders, for finding the time. So I will present around for, let's say, 40 minutes. And after that, we will have the Q&A. So Anders will also be available because a lot what I talk is, well, it has an academic angle as we are a university, but we also deploy these tools for Energinet and also for ENTSO on a European level, as I will talk about. So Anders can then talk about how they use this data, if they hopefully find it useful, maybe on the Energinet and both on the ENTSO side. So thanks a lot, Anders, for being here. And thanks everybody for joining. Thanks for the invite. Let me just double check that hopefully you can see my slides and hear me okay.
Yes, everything is okay.
Super. So I'll present around 40 minutes, and after that, we should have good time for Q&A. So I'll be presenting the CorRES tool, which, as Jan mentioned, is all about providing wind and solar data. In the MAPA project, we do it for the spine modeling, but we also do it, for example, for Energinet and so for their modelings and so forth. So it's all about generating the best possible wind and solar data we can for large-scale assessments. CorRES can be used even on a singular plant, but basically it's mainly used for what we say continental-scale simulations, mainly in Europe, but as I will mention, we have also deployed it globally. I will show a few of those examples as well. What I will do is I will focus a bit also first on what are the key parts of the CorRES methodology-wise. I will focus on the parts which we think are maybe unique, at least we find it so. And I will really focus on the wind side because we are DTU Wind, and we really think the wind side is where we hopefully go even beyond state of the art. I will also quickly say what do we do with solar, but solar is where we say we do state of the art, but it's the wind where we hope we can push beyond state of the art, so I'll focus on the wind side. Then I will talk also on where do we use CorRES, and because it's GPST, here I will mainly focus on what do we use it for ENTSO-E. Maybe everybody know what ENTSO-E is, but that's like the European level collection of the different transmission system operators in Europe, provide some very key studies towards 2050 in Europe for scenarios and adequacy. I'll talk about that. How do we provide this wind and solar data there to provide that they can do the best possible decisions based on the best possible data. I'll also talk a little bit about the capabilities of CorRES going sub-hourly, so we can simulate up to 5-minute data, and also forecasts, which we currently use for assessing flexibility needs, so a bit like the more high resolution data and those kind of within the day flexibility needs. And then I'll also talk about a few examples where we've deployed CorRES outside of Europe. So let's go here. And I think, the questions will be collected. So if you have anything, just write it in the Q&A and I'll do my best to answer them after the presentation. So the CorRES is accessible online. We have a web service. I'll talk a bit about how that works a bit later, but also the code is openly available. So we provide data which is openly available. The code is openly available, and even you can access some of the web service functionalities purely openly, meaning that it's run on our servers. So I hope it ticks the boxes of in this pillar for open data and open code. So first I will talk about, as I said, I will focus on the wind side. I will quickly later talk about the solar, but I will mainly focus on the wind side. So we want to simulate representative wind generation time series. Maybe here just to clarify, and I'll be later clear on the applications. We are not doing any sort of forecasting or anything like that. This is all for planning. So it's for system planning, maybe 5, 10, 20, 30 years ahead. So we want to create basically the best possible representation of wind generation with existing installations, but also future installations, all in the planning kind of horizon. So I'll start a little bit on the wind speeds. How can we produce the best possible wind speeds for these purposes in CorRES? And for that purpose, if you know similar tools like this, how do we start on a European scale? We have to rely on some weather data. Here we use the RF5 reanalysis data. I will also later talk about some other data, but the core data we use is the RF5, ECNWF's European kind of a key reanalysis data set that provides historical wind speeds simulated globally, but especially here for Europe for something like 60 years. So it's a very long data set, very good for kind of long-term studies, finding also extreme storms and so forth. However, while that is commonly used, we have found it a bit inadequate for wind modeling purposes. So what we do is we deploy our high-resolution global wind atlas, and that's why I want to talk about here at the beginning. So basically saying, why shouldn't we just use RF5 as it is, just pull those wind speeds and use them? So why do we deploy global wind atlas? So in this map on the left, you can see, there's a global wind atlas. You can easily Google it, but that's our in-house product for very high resolution modeling of wind speeds. And importantly, on the left-hand side, if you look, there's a map of some countries, and these are locations of wind power plants in those countries. If we look at the difference between RF5 wind speeds and our global wind atlas version 2 wind speeds, they are quite large. So if the color is very much blue, It means basically that RF5 is very much underestimating just the average wind speed. And if it's very blue, it means that it's sort of misestimating it by 40%. And also, in sometimes we can go to the other direction that we may have over prediction of wind speeds in the RF5 or something like 20%. So they have very large differences, and for that reason, we do suggest using the global wind atlas to correct those kind of misestimates of wind speeds from RF5 or any other reanalysis product for that matter. And here's a little bit of an explanation why and why do we think we need to go higher resolution. So on the left at the top, you can see that this is some turbine locations in black. This is in an example region in Portugal. And this is the RF5 kind of resolution at the top left. And you can see that we have around 30 kilometer resolution, meaning that these boxes are like 30 times 30 kilometer boxes. So you can see that these turbines are just within a very coarse box. So we only know this average wind speed from RF5. However, with our in-house modeling, when we use the WASP model and go towards the global wind atlas, you can see that we can go to a much higher resolution of wind resources. And you can see, which makes sense, that these turbines, the black dots, are also aligned based on where actually we have higher wind speeds. So if one would use just the RF5, we kind of don't have access to this level of information. What is the actual local wind speeds at the turbines or at the individual wind power plants? So that's the key reason why we suggest using something like global wind atlas. It has a global coverage, although in here it's just shown for Europe. And then a little bit about, does it matter really? I mean, is there really value in using the global wind atlas? So I want to show a few examples. So in some situations like in Poland, which is a very simple terrain, maybe it doesn't have such a big impact, but just to show it here, we have the measured generation. So we also validate, of course, this simulation tools heavily. In black, we have the measured generation, and then we have the raw RF5. So the red one is just using RF5 as it is, just not using the global wind atlas scaling, and the blue is with using the global wind atlas scaling. So we can see that everything is more or less the same. So in the case of Poland, it is a very simple terrain, it's quite easy to model. We see that even RF5 matches the measured generation quite well. So yeah, this is the generation distribution, how much low generation values, how much high generation values, and then we also look how well the measured data is correlated with the simulated data. So that's kind of an easy, just based on terrain to model. But in most countries, we do see from a small to a modest to actually a very large impact of using global wind atlas. So this is an example of Sweden, which already starts to have a bit more complex terrain due to forests and mountains. And we see that the blue line is better aligned with the measured data. Also, we get a slightly higher correlation, but especially the capacity factor is quite a lot closer to reality, still slightly underestimated, but significantly better than using RF5 raw. So we start to see the benefit of using the high resolution global wind atlas data. And then when going to Southern European countries, especially, which has quite a lot of complexity in the terrain due to mountains especially, we see that actually if you would use RF5 raw, so just pull those wind speeds from the RF5 reanalysis, it's a very large underestimation of capacity factor. We see in the case of Italy, we have around 21% measured capacity factor, and if one would just use RF5 raw, it's something like 9%. So that's a very drastic underestimation. When we do use the global wind atlas scaling, we see the capacity factor is actually very closely matching to the measured. However, we still see some error in the distribution, but not anywhere as drastic as going with RF5. So basically, while in some countries you could go with just raw reanalysis data, sort of simple terrain countries, we do suggest on average always to use scaling with a high resolution wind data. In our case, we use our global wind atlas, could be something else as well. And we have also published paper recently where we demonstrate this looking at more than 10 countries in Europe and consistently found that global wind atlas significantly improves the different metrics. I will not go through the metrics due to time. You can check the paper, but we go across multiple metrics and see that global wind atlas consistently, when used together with RF5, provides a much better fit to measure data than just using RF5 raw. And we also tested global wind atlas version 3, but it didn't perform as well actually as the older global wind atlas, so we are using global wind atlas version 2. So that was a view of how we treat the wind speed. So we do rely on some widely used datasets like the RF5 reanalysis, but what we do is we go much more high resolution with our in-house global wind atlas tool, and we have also, at least in our minds, demonstrated clearly that it's quite important, especially in complex terrain countries like Southern European countries in Europe. And also, if you do not do it, please note that you may be very drastically underestimating wind capacity factors in some countries. That was on the wind speed. So of course, nothing due to time here is fully comprehensive, but there's also those papers where you can look, which are at the bottom of the different slides, where you can find a lot more information on the details. How do we deploy the global windowless exactly? But just to say that, we find it very important. Then I want to talk a bit about the power curves, because obviously you need the wind speeds, but you also need the power curve to translate those wind speeds into power generation time series. So I want to talk a little bit about what do we do with the power curves. So first, we deploy what we call a generic power curve model. So we do not use manufacturer power curves. We have done that before, so we would just take a Siemens or a Vestas turbine. However, we found that to be a little bit limiting in our modeling, so we actually built from ground up a generic power curve model utilizing the PyWake tool that is also from our institute. We did millions of simulations of different turbine and power plant setups. You can see the parameter space on the right. And there we can we build a surrogate model, so we can basically estimate the behavior of any type of a wind power plant, what the power curve is likely to be. And we are especially improved recently the handling of turbulence intensity, so I'll showcase that a bit later. But we can go anywhere within that parameter space. We can estimate what the power curve is likely to be, and that's what we do. So when we run pan-European runs, for example, especially for the existing, we do run every power plant we have. We have a data set of more than 10,000 wind power plants in Europe, and we do simulate every one of them, and every one of them will have a unique power curve. So there are no generic power curve. I mean, yeah, it's generic power curve in a sense, but we estimate a specific version of that to every wind power plant that we simulate. And there's a bit of a visual on what the different parameters do. So yeah, if we vary the turbulence intensity, it changes the shape of the power curve on the left as an example. And a very critical one that changes the power curve very drastically is the specific power. So that's the ratio between the size of the turbine physically, its swept area, to the electric generator, and that has a very drastic impact. So, and we can see very different specific powers being deployed across Europe. So getting that right is very important in getting the power generation time series correct. Those were just a few examples, so we can vary any of these parameters shown on the right, but just to demonstrate a bit some example, what is the impact on the power curve. Also, another very important bit that I will demonstrate soon in the validation sense is that it's not just a singular power curve of a singular wind turbine. We also put a lot of effort in modeling the wake losses in quite detail. So you can see that on the right-hand side box, we have also many of the parameters are not singular turbine parameters, but they are plant parameters. How many turbines, what is the installation density, so how close the turbines are, or how sort of dispersed they are. So we can also model that one. So for example, here we change the density of the installations, and you can see that that's the direct impact on the wake losses. The wake losses impact differently at different wind speed levels. But also, yeah, when we increase the number of turbines, of course, then the general level of wakes goes higher. And again, we can see that the level of the density, how that impacts the wake losses. So we also put quite a lot of effort in modeling the wake losses in detail. And then just as I mentioned, kind of the new thing we did this year is that we introduced a more detailed handling of the turbulence intensity. So the user can set or use some data set to estimate turbulence intensity at each site. And just to show how does it has two impacts on the power curve. So on the blue, you can see just the turbine level power curve, no wake losses. And the dashed lines is with the 5% turbulence intensity, and the solid line is with 10% turbulence intensity. So you can see even on a singular turbine, it does change the power curve shape. What is the turbulence intensity? But especially then when we start to go down, so we see more and more turbines, so we see increased wake losses. You see that then also the turbulence intensity has an impact in how the wake losses affect. So if it's more turbulent, then we usually have less wake losses, and when we have less turbulent, especially offshore, then we tend to have more wake losses. So just a visualization of the new thing we did with the turbulence intensity. And then we can, of course, use this because usually onshore we have a bit more higher turbulence intensity and a bit lower offshore. So this allows us to kind of differentiate that even the same turbine in onshore and offshore circumstances actually produce somewhat differently. And then the final thing we added also quite recently is the handling of the unavailability. So for a long time in CorRES, I mean, we always, for many years, have done the wake losses in quite detail. But the second largest loss usually is an availability loss. So turbines being in repair or for whatever reason not turning. We handled that just as a static loss, so which is basically reduced the power output on a constant manner across the time. That was quite rough, especially for offshore, where we do see that availability of the turbine does have an impact on the profile of the power. As I mentioned, we have this generic power curve model, and then on top of that, we also have a dynamic and availability modeling. So yeah, that's, as I was saying before, the technical issue. That is about modeling the next largest loss, so the unavailability loss in more detail. So we have created quite a detailed modeling of mean time to failure, mean time to repair. So we have distributions of when the next failure is expected and how long the repair takes. So we can create this availability time series for every turbine. And when we pull it on a plant level, so when we have a lot of turbines, we get this much more realistic. We have found kind of the time series of unavailability on a plant level. So how much percentage of the plant is available, how much is unavailable. And here I try to demonstrate that with the validation case. So this is a Belgian offshore wind generation. As before, in the black, we have the measured data. And then in the red, we have a more naive model with no wakes and just a very rough modeling of unavailability in a static sense. And in the blue, we have deployed all of the detailed modeling that I mentioned. And first of all, with modeling the wakes, we of course get the capacity factor much better. So you can see if we don't put the wakes, of course, we are way overestimating the capacity factor. But also we get the distribution shape much better of the distribution. And also you can see at the high generation values in the red line. So when we just have a static 10% unavailability assumption, we get this a little bit surprising spike. And that's because we had just a so rough sort of estimation of the unavailability that it's too static basically. But in the blue one, we get this much more realistic distribution at the high generation level. It's still not perfect. Maybe in this sense, actually the 10% loss was a little bit too high. Maybe it's 7% or something like that. But at least the shape is much better. And we get a little bit better also correlation to measured data. Here is for another case, for the Danish offshore, we see basically the same. So we need to first take wakes into consideration to get the capacity factors right. And also we get these high generation values better modeled when we have the stochastic unavailability when we use that. So yeah, so that's what I went through. So first we went through the wind speeds where we used the global wind atlas for bringing the high resolution winds in, scaling the RFI reanalysis. Then I went through this kind of modeling. How do we do with the power curves? We went through with wake modeling, turbulence intensity, stochastic availability, and hopefully, I was able to show that it seems to be working better also compared to the measured data. So this is where we are, and this is our usual up to now is basically the wind modeling we do for outer level simulation. But we have also capabilities going sub-hourly, so up to 5 minutes, and we can also simulate forecast errors. And I do want to talk a little bit about that because it's something that has been really growing in importance. We are utilizing that more and more, also for Energinet, but also with other TSOs. So I want to talk a little bit about those capabilities in CorRES. So we can just say that for now, I haven't considered any forecast errors up to now, but we can say that the wind speed or the generation at a certain time step, you can say, okay, it is what we forecasted plus an error. And of course, you can say this could be day-ahead forecast, intraday hour-ahead forecast, but it makes sense that, there's a real value and a forecasted value. And of course, you can say, okay, then we need to subtract these two to get the error. And this also shows that for us to understand the error, we need to understand both of these items. What is the real generation? And also on high resolution. And why high resolution? Well, balancing market, for example, we need something like a 5-minute resolution, so the hourly is not sufficient anymore. And also the forecast, we need to model this in detail for all of the horizons we might be interested. Maybe we want to look at day-ahead forecast or intraday, hour-ahead, and so forth. So really both of these that we need to get right. And I want to talk a little bit about that on these slides. So first of all, I have up to now said we use the RFI reanalysis. Even when we scale it with the global winner, that's just a statistical downscaling. So ultimately the underlying data is still hourly. And even on the hourly level, we know that RFI, because it's quite a low resolution model with 30 kilometer, it doesn't include all of the high resolution components. And it basically doesn't include anything beyond the hourly level. So what can we do? What we do in CorRES is that we simulate the sub-hourly variability using a stochastic model. So on the right-hand side, you can see the magenta. This is from the WRF model, but it could be from any methodological model, RFI or something else. We see this kind of linearly interpolated hourly values. So it doesn't change that much because it's only hourly values in the magenta line. But then with the stochastic simulation engine, which I will quickly introduce in the next slides, we can create this kind of variability around those hourly levels. And that's why we use the stochastic engine to create realistic variations around that hourly level. So still the hourly, the reanalysis data or wherever it comes from, that still sets the overall sort of distribution and the profile of the wind, but we just create that high resolution variability on top of it. And here is that in a frequency domain. So we know that after a certain frequency, the WRF model or any methodological model simply cannot reproduce all the high resolution information. It kind of tapers down, as we see in the magenta. And what we know is that this shouldn't happen when you look at the real measurements. So we add that. So in the blue line, we have added those high resolution components. We don't change stuff with the low resolution. So we don't want to do that. We have a parameter to control it. So we only add them after a certain basically cutoff frequency. We start to add some variability, and we can also control that. And we study a lot, of course, what these parameters should be. Also, the expected value. So, and it's quite simple to add that we have just some wind speeds from methodological data, and we add on top of that some fluctuations. Please also note, even for this presentation, I talk it in a simplistic manner, but this is of course done also considering spatial correlation. So we simulate 100 locations or whatever, and we also consider, of course, spatial correlations between locations. But just here simply on a singular location, we just add these basic fluctuation time series on top of the methodological. But please note that the expected value of the fluctuations is 0. So we are not moving the wind speeds up or down. We're just adding high resolution components. And just to demonstrate a bit what does that mean and what's the point of it, we have some measured 10-minute wind speed changes. So this is a 10-minute wind speed change. It's averaged to represent the wind power plant. So it's not just a met mast. And we can see, of course, it goes up and down because it's a change. And if we just pull in a naive linear interpolation from hourly, from the WRF, or could be RFI, any reanalysis dataset or methodological dataset, we see very, very too little of these 10-minute changes. And then we do these stochastic simulations. In this paper, we have also introduced some t-distributed sort of characteristics, which I will not go through here due to time, but you can check in the paper. And ultimately, we can produce a much more representative kind of variability patterns. It's not perfect necessarily, but at least it's much better that you can get purely from a reanalysis dataset. And this is by adding the high resolution stochastic variability. Also, and due to time, I will not go there in detail here, but we have also an engine to simulate the forecast. So up to the previous slide, we were just talking about how can we make sub-hourly like real power generation time series. So it didn't yet include any forecast. It's just how to make those 5-minute simulations, let's say, that are realistic. But of course, as it was mentioned, for calculating forecast errors, we also need a forecast. And due to time, I will not go there. But we have also an engine where we can do day ahead, intraday, hour ahead, different forecast simulations. That's also done with the multivariate time series stochastic simulation model. But then what I do want to say is that, okay, when we have both of those, so again, if we want to say what are the wind forecast errors, and this is, of course, why do we do this? Just to clarify, of course, is that maybe we have some measured data of current wind forecast errors, but we also want to say what will those be in 2030, 2040, to assess basically flexibility needs, reserve requirements, and so forth. And as was mentioned, we really need both of these items because it's a subtraction of the real minus the forecasted. So we talk quite a lot about how to get this real, be this wind speed or power generation correct. We needed to add those high frequency components to get representative 5-minute data. And then also, I didn't go through it due to time, but we also have a simulation engine for the forecasts. And we really need both of these components to then calculate the subtraction and to understand those forecast errors. Yeah, of course, historically is one thing, but also in the future, when we have more wind distributed in a different way with different technology, we need to understand those. And we have also validated those quite heavily, especially with when we work with Elia, the Belgian TSO, and we were quite happy with the validation results. We were also able to capture this quite clear non-Gaussianity. So here is blue the measured, and in red our simulation results for the day-ahead forecast error, and here is a latest or a few hours ahead forecast errors. We're quite happy with the overall fit, and especially these tails, which is not trivial to model, and it's important to note that they are quite non-Gaussian. Yeah, so one shouldn't do any bell curve assumptions here. So we were quite happy with that. Then the last thing I want to say, so for now we have looked how do we make hourly level wind runs with the global wind atlas and wave classes and so forth. I've talked quite briefly, but due to time, just introducing the concept of going sub-hourly and simulating forecasts. But the last thing I want to say is what about climate change impacts? Because up to now, everything has been based on historical, basically reanalysis data. So I want to talk a little bit about what have we done to consider climate change. So first, yeah, a few years ago, we were with a colleague, we were doing some material and analysis for the IPCC report on climate change, especially on how climate change is expected to impact energy systems. And just very briefly, before going to the wind, just wanted to mention that if you look at the different energy supplies under climate change, wind is not expected to be the most impactful. So the idea is that wind speeds would go drastically down or something like that due to climate change. Doesn't appear so. I will talk a little bit about that. There might be some changes, but we don't see a drastic decline. However, just to say that on a general level, hydropower, especially its seasonality, and then also cooling water for thermal power plants, they were found to be the supply that are most impacted by climate change, not wind or solar, just to say that before going to the details on wind. So on wind energy, we reviewed a bunch of papers some years ago, but I don't think it has changed too much after that. We don't see any, let's say, catastrophic decline of wind speeds due to climate change, but we do see that there's some changes in the variability seasonality, and that could be driving some additional backup and storage needs. So maybe the overall level of wind speed is not catastrophically declining, but we could see longer Dunkelflaute and things like that. Why also a big motivation for us to do this on the wind side, to consider the climate change, is that basically ENTSO-E in their newest PCD data, so ENTSO-E has this pan-European climate database where we also contribute. They wanted to include climate change. So they have these climate models shown on the right, 6 models and 4 emission scenarios. So all the way towards 2100, which are then used in their assessments. So we basically had to do also the climate change in wind. We wanted to do it, but we also had to do it because we do want to work for ENTSO-E for this PCD data. So just very briefly, really, again, there's no time here to go in details, but I wanted to mention that you shouldn't just the same as I said previously, you just can't take the RFI wind speeds and just use them. I mean, in Southern Europe, that would yield unrealistically low capacity factors. So also when you have climate change, so you have many models. In this paper, we assessed 8 different models, and so I have those 6 different models. You do need to scale them. You just can't take the wind speeds just blindly from them because there might be biases and different things in the models. So what we do, we should also here the global wind atlas to do that basically bias adjustment or that high resolution data input that I mentioned earlier. And then just briefly, well, what kind of climate change impact do we expect to see? Here are the models, the 6 models that we have run for ENTSO-E, and I have taken 2 of them just to show the MEHR and the SE3 models, just to show on the x-axis you have, let's say, the current capacity factor on annual average, and on the y-axis you have those capacity factors in 2050. So we see some variations, but we don't see any drastic decline If the dots are on this line, it just means there's basically no change. So there's kind of regional variation. It's not the same regions that are impacted in all of the models. So that just shows that we have significant model-to-model uncertainty. So basically, we don't know how the climate change will impact winds, even under the same. So both of these models are under the same scenario. So they say same amount of global warming, but we don't know exactly how that will impact the wind speeds. If we look on average, just across the whole continent, so this is the average on the right-hand bottom, just across all the regions on average, then we go up or down. Some models shows no change, some models shows 2.7% decrease, and the other models are in between. So maybe on average, one could say 1 to 2% decline in capacity factor. So it's something, but it's not like a catastrophic decline. But please note, of course, that there could be individual regions that are impacted more. And of course, this is just the averages. Underlying this, we could have variations in how long Dunkelflaute or low wind, low solar events we may have, how often they happen. Storms could have different likelihoods. That is something we are currently looking at, but at least to show that these models at least do not show any catastrophic decline of wind speeds due to climate change. Then I have only one slide on the solar PV because I am also wary of the time. And with wind is where we really think we can contribute the most. But I wanted to say that in CorRES you can also simulate solar because all the users of CorRES want to do solar as well. It makes good sense because you have both in the system. But just very briefly, we do use the PV lib. So we are very happy that that is available. Just we can model different tilt angles, orientations, panels and converters, different overplanting. This is quite important. We see increasing overplanting, so the panels could be 150 megawatt, and the grid connection could be only 100 megawatt, something like this. So obviously that should be modeled because it increases the capacity factors visible to the grid. We take irradiance from ERA5 or from the climate projections, and then we use a few different methods for splitting to direct, normal, and diffuse irradiance. But yeah, I don't want to spend too much time here. Happy to answer any questions if there may be, but this is something we believe it's roughly state of the art, but we are not claiming we go anywhere beyond state of the art on the solar side. But just wanted to mention that we also have it. Then I have now gone through the key methodologies on hourly level runs, wakes, global wind atlas. I mentioned how can we do sub-hourly runs, and we can do also forecast simulations for flexibility assessments. And then even we can assess the impact of climate change. But now I want to go, I was also already talking about that a bit, how do we use CorRES in different use cases, but I want to present a bit more about our work for ENTSO-E, for the pan-European level, on transmission system operators around Europe, and also a little bit outside of Europe. So a big thing we do, and we are very happy that we are selected there, is we work on the BCD database for ENTSO-E. That's their weather-dependent database, basically. We do wind, some of the solar. There's also hydro and demand side, but mainly we contribute on the wind side, which is used, for example, in the 10-year network development plan, in the adequacy assessment. And I'm happy to say that the newest version of the data is openly available. So from here you can download everything there is. So we are very happy to be contributing here. For ENTSO-E, what we do, so I focused quite a lot on validation in the previous slides because that's a very critical part. Of course, you can imagine if we work with ENTSO-E and it's actually used somewhere, the data, validation is critical. But after we have validated the model, we model two types of runs, existing installations. So this is where we have that more than 10,000 wind power plants. We produce individual power cores for every plant, and we simulate this range of data, something like 75 years. We also simulated under the climate change, under all the 6 scenarios, all the 6 models and 4 scenarios. So we produce a lot of data here. But we also model the future wind technologies. So this is with the existing installations, but we also see a lot of changes in the kind of turbines that are being installed, higher hub heights, lower specific powers, different locations. So we also model that. And then ENTSO-E uses this in different ways in their scenarios. You have some amount of existing installations. And of course, then you have the new installations coming in due to repowering or otherwise, maybe floating offshore and things like that. So we, just to say that those are the two kind of things we simulate existing in future. And just some examples, what is the geographical coverage? Just one onshore example on the left. So do also note, even though we aggregate the results for these regions, for ENTSO, under the hood, we simulate those 10,000 wind power plants for the existing, and roughly the same also for the future, with some assumptions on how they're sited. And so it goes a bit, so from Northern Africa also, because there are some connections. So it goes a little bit also beyond, let's say, EU, for example. And on the right-hand side, you can see then the offshore regions. So in addition to the onshore, we of course simulate the offshore as well, going very deep towards in the middle of the North Sea to also support the planning of offshore energy islands, for example. And of course, there's quite a lot of data because it's without climate change, with climate change, but still deploying all of the methodologies we have discussed thus far. They are, however, hourly level, so I also wanted to showcase a little bit where we have used the sub-hourly data. So the ENTSO data at this point is hourly. But here is a study we did a few years ago for Elia, the Belgian TSO. They are applying offshore wind. I think it's sort of happening now. But at that point, it was planned, so there was around 2 gigawatt existing offshore wind, and they wanted to plan what about if we have 2 gigawatt more, roughly. So what are the impacts on storms, ramp rates, forecast errors? So basically, it was our job to assess those likelihoods for ramps and storms and forecast errors, and then in-house they kind of use those for assessing the mitigation things they might need to deploy. So just a little bit about what we do. Obviously, again, validation, critical. We get some measured data. Let's say here is the storm behavior, some simulated data, not absolutely one-to-one, but we were quite happy. Here is called CorWind. That was the old name for CorRES. Sorry about that, I didn't change it, but this is CorRES, basically the red. So we look at the ramp rates, forecast error, storm behavior, all of those things. So this is just for the storms, but we looked at all of them, of course. Heavy validation. And then, of course, when the model was validated, we used this 2 gigawatt of existing, but we also simulated the new 2 gigawatt, of course. That's the whole point of the exercise. So we simulated that for something like 40 years on 5-minute resolution. And the point is that we tested many different technologies. So the existing is what it is. That's the existing 2 gigawatt. But the red, blue, and the magenta here, they are about different technologies being deployed for the new offshore wind, because they was under planning and it was unclear what kind of storm shutdown technology would be deployed. And this is one of the large storm events. So you can see that all the generation goes basically to zero because we have such a severe storm, and Belgium is a pretty small offshore region that ultimately it impacts the entire region. But here, we were able to test the different technologies, what are their impacts on storms, just as an example of usage of CorRES, and everything was run on 5-minute resolution, including also forecast. So we also tested the risk of unforecasted storm shutdowns, for example, but I will jump a little bit here just to get through roughly in time. Also, I thought, so we did it with the ENTSO for Elia. We are also working on similar things with EnergyNet, but they were European, but I just wanted to showcase two things. So we also have the CorRES web service, where over the web, you can actually launch all the runs we discussed here. If anybody is interested, you can later contact me on how to access it and so forth. For academic, we give it completely for free. So you can launch these runs from the CorRES web service, and we have done here also runs outside of Europe. Here's an example we did for Danish Energy Agency and their contacts in Japan, where we studied offshore wind in Japan. We studied these sites shown here. What are the likelihood of ramps and storms and things like that. I will not go through the details because this is just to showcase we have done stuff outside of Europe. And then also we were happy that the Canadian institutes selected to use CorRES in their new update of their CODER database, which they use for their energy system modeling. So the new data there for wind and solar are also simulated by CorRES. But that was just to showcase that we can also do stuff outside of Europe. So just to conclude here, importantly, I would say if you use RF5 or any reanalysis data or climate projection data, it's very critical to check what kind of capacity factors you actually get out of it. So we should just use the global wind atlas. We use the global wind atlas version 2 for scaling it. We find that quite important to get roughly reasonable capacity factor estimates. We also did quite a lot of detailed wake loss with also details on turbulence intensity. We find that to be quite impactful, increase the validation a lot. We can do stochastic fluctuations and dynamic unavailability. That's especially if you talk about the high generation values and ramps. So that's kind of where the stochastic simulation comes in. Also, if we want to do sub-hourly resolution and forecast simulation, which is something we are doing a lot now for assessing flexibility needs like batteries or, I don't know, electrolyzer sizing and things like that. How do we manage the short-term flexibility in the system? How much do we need? That's where we can deploy these assessments. And then also on the climate change, we can analyze that. It's not likely to have a very large impact on wind, but still we can analyze that. And yeah, definitely you want to assess multi-models, as we show the different models actually give a very different view on how climate change impacts wind. That's it. I'm a little bit out of the 40 minutes, but also we had that technical glitch, so hopefully that is fine. That's what I had.
That's perfectly fine. Thank you very much, Matti. We have a set of questions, so I will go through them as well. The first question is related to the fact that you're simulating turbulence. And the question was, isn't the turbulence index available from ERA 5 already?
Yeah, well, I have talked with the wind modelers and they were quite skeptical on using the turbulence from ERA 5. However, we have actually recently a new dataset from our detailed wind modelers, and we plan to use that for finding the turbulence intensity. For now, we just do this rough 5 and 10% assumptions offshore and onshore, but we plan to going to use this new dataset that we have. We haven't tested ERA 5, but my understanding from the wind modelers is it may be a little bit rough to take it from ERA 5. You may want to go to higher resolution, and that's where we aim to go next.
And the next question is kind of two questions in one. So what data is needed if one downloads CorRES and runs it locally? And related to that, it's also, do you have any instructions to run a dry run first project of CorRES?
So what is needed? So basically you do need, if you just pull the CorRES code, you do need a lot of background weather data, which is usually gigabyte or terabyte level. So that is doable, but also we do have the CorRES web service. So if you what you can run everything is, you just run it on our server, you launch it over the web, it goes to our server, you get the results back. You don't need anything, it's all there. That is something we offer for free. So the code is always for free, but even this service is free for academic non-profit users. So just get in touch with me and we can make it work. For companies, we do ask for some subscription for that, but academics is free. So either you need to download quite a lot of weather data or you use the web service where we have already downloaded it and you don't need to worry about it. Was there another part?
Yeah, you have instructions or video instruction or tutorial on how to use the tool.
Yes, we have something. Again, you can contact me, but we are about to launch a CorRES YouTube channel where I will upload some tutorials on how to run the web service. But at this point, you can contact me and I can send it to you, but we also will launch the YouTube channel soon.
Excellent. And then still on the usability, there was a question related to, is there a location planning tool that can be easily linked to the CorRES tool?
Yes, so what we have, well, first of all, the existing wind power plants, they are based on a third-party data set, so that's not something we can freely share. But yeah, you need basically a data set of existing wind power plants. For the new, for new installations, so where would the new installations be? We actually have also a GUI on the CorRES web service where you can utilize some pre-built functionalities to remove nature protected zones and things like that. So you can do it there actually on the CorRES web service. Then we also, if you get in touch with us, we also have some Python scripts if you want to do it yourself that we can suggest.
Mm-hmm. All right, and then there were a couple of questions that were more on the technical side of your modeling. So the first one is, have you considered direction dependency of wake losses for more linearly shaped wind farms?
Yes, so the sort of generic parkour model that I talk about here, that is not direction dependent because by definition it's very generic, so you can deploy it with very limited information. But what I showed for the Elia, the Belgian TSO, yes, we did very detailed wake modeling considering the locations of every turbine and every wake loss was direction dependent. However, for that, it's not automatic in CorRES, so you need to do pre-processing. For example, we do in PyWake. So if you want to do detailed wake loss modeling, you can do it PyWake, and then you can import that into CorRES. So the standard generic stuff in CorRES doesn't consider direction, but you can do it, but in another tool, and then you need to import those direction-dependent parkers to CorRES, basically. But it can be done, and we have done it. Yeah, the Elia, it always had the direction dependence.
Mm-hmm. And still related to the wake, there was this other question of how should we consider wake effects between farms, especially in offshore regions?
That's a very important. So here, and I would also, and I didn't put it to the time here, but that's a very big question on its own. What we can do in CorRES with PyWake is the so-called micro-scale wake losses. So we can put wind farms, and we can model farm-to-farm wake losses, but it only works up to 1 or 2 gigawatt of installations. When we go to 5, 8, 10 gigawatt towards energy islands, we need to also consider the so-called mesoscale wake losses. We also have a preliminary model for that. So again, you can contact me later, and I'm happy to share that to you. But that's also something we are looking more like. What about the wakes when it's 5 or 10 gigawatt? That's also very much an active research area, and we're trying different things there.
But it's a kind of a future ongoing then for CorRES.
It's not a future. It's very much an ongoing thing. So we have something there. We can do wake losses, but it's only appropriate for running like 1 or 2 gigawatt of close by installations. That is there, I would say, quite detailed. But when we go to 5 or 10 gigawatt, that is something that we only have an early version of that, but it's also something we are very much doing. It's not a future thing, I would say it's an ongoing thing.
And then there was a question related to your bias correction. So is there, how do you do bias correct in simple terms? And do you have a paper that actually details your bias corrections?
Yes. So those are there. I will, of course, also send the slides to you, Jean, later in a PDF format, so you can maybe distribute them as well. But yeah, they are in the papers linked there. The details are there. For now, in these papers that are shown here, we only do it on a linear manner. So we are just like we interpolate from ERA 5 to any location, then we take the detailed global wind atlas, which is also a little bit smoothened to get a power plant level wind speed, and then we just scale up and down the ERA 5 wind speeds. We also have a non-linear model, but up to now we have just used a linear model because it actually seems to be working quite fine. But we are also testing a non-linear model where we would actually fit the entire distribution. So we take the ERA 5 distribution and we fit the entire distribution to fit the global wind atlas distribution. That's something we are testing right now.
And then there was another question, since our audience is worldwide, is are these data sets available for locations outside of Europe as well?
Yes, so a lot of this data that is openly now available is done with ENSOE, so that's quite European based. However, CorRES can be used anywhere. So if you get in touch with me, we can get you to the CorRES web service, and there you can do anything globally. We did that for Japan. It's done for Australia, and now it's done for Canada, in South Africa. So with that, you can simulate any region. But the kind of ready-made simulations that we have done are mainly for Europe, just because we mainly work with European institutes for that. But the underlying thing, CorRES is available globally, so you can do your own runs, and we are happy to support there.
And then there was a question related to is there a way to access the GW82 data? Because the Global Wind Atlas.info website only shows the latest version. So.
Yes, it is actually available in the CorRES code GitHub page, and yeah, you can get in touch with me, and I can forward you to somebody who can make it available to you. It is possible to access.
And then there was a question about why are the wind power time series not available on grid resolution?
So grid resolution?
Yes.
Like, so I guess there we talk about ERA 5 grid, I would imagine. So we could do that, but what we rather want to do is we want to simulate every wind power plant, and those wind power plants are not on a grid. So I know some others take it that is on a grid point level, but we rather take the approach that we actually interpolate from the grid to where the actual wind power plants are. I know it's a little bit different approach to some other people. We have only 2 minutes left, so maybe it's not enough time to say why do we do it like this, but this is what we do. So we rather than the grid, we rather interpolate to where the actual wind power plants are.
Okay, and then I was wondering, how do you kind of consider the topology or terrain topology in CorRES tool to consider like mountainous areas and all sorts of
Here we
disruptions?
basically it's a bit rough, so that's something that starts to go to such a detail that CorRES maybe doesn't fully go there. I know on a real plant design you would go there, but we basically rely on global wind atlas for handling this. So that's why we use the high resolution global wind atlas, which very much goes with mountains and forests and so forth. So it's basically the global wind atlas scaling that takes care of this. I wonder, is there any question? I think if Anders is still here, I don't know if there is any question to those who use this data. Or is there all technical questions?
I can say I'm still here just to confirm that, and I think we've got 1 minute left, so I'll just say, Matthew, thanks for a good presentation, and just say as a TSO in Denmark, of course we work very close with the N2E and this modeling, but by CorRES we got the capability to look more granularly on specific wind offshore parks, and the granularity, that's one thing. But also, as you mentioned, Marty, looking into the intra-hour from wind power production curves is also essential for understanding the need for ancillary service. Finally, and we also have produced a report about this, we looked into using the forecast errors, the day ahead and hour ahead, and combined this forecast errors with our resources to mitigate imbalances from forecast errors. So there's a lot of functionalities that we can use to dive more detailed into this area as a TSO.
Thanks.
Oh, that
Thanks,
sounds
Anders.
really great. Yeah, thank you very much, Anders. But I also want to thank you very much, Matti, for giving your time and presenting your tool to all of us. So thank you very much, and thank you, Anders, for attending today and as a TSO representative for us. So thank you very much on behalf of all the institutions who have organized this webinar, and I wish you a good rest of the day, or good morning or good night, depending on where you are. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thanks
Bye
a lot,
bye.
Anders. Thanks, Sean. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.